Shame is one of those experiences that almost everyone has felt, but very few people actually understand. We talk about it, we label it, we try to manage it, but most of what we've been taught about shame is incomplete. If we misunderstand shame, we often end up trying to fix it in ways that don't work. So today I want to bring some clarity to it. To start, shame is not an emotion. It isn't a moral compass. It's not a signal that you've done something wrong. It's not a flaw in your personality. It's actually just a survival mechanism designed to keep you connected to others. Most people think shame means I messed up, but shame actually sounds more like I am messed up. And if you don't understand that difference, shame will become the authority in your life. It will shape your relationships, your boundaries, your visibility, and even your identity without you ever realizing it. Now, to understand shame, we have to start somewhere deeper than modern psychology. We must first recognize that we are a relational species. Humans were not wired for independence, and I don't care how independent you think you are. We're all wired for connection first, survival second. In fact, what psychology labels as survival mechanisms are often just desperate bids for connection to others. Now let me try to explain this. From birth, regulation is outsourced to our caretakers to maintain a connection with them. So what that means is that our nervous systems co-regulate with them. Our identity forms through mirroring with them. Safety is experienced through their responsiveness towards us. And meaning is constructed relationally. So in short, we train our children, and your parents trained you, to behave in ways that were deemed acceptable to the society in which you were raised. As a result, we adopt the values of our culture in order to feel safe, loved, and valued. And you must understand that our nervous system prioritizes maintaining connection at all costs. The reason why you must understand that is because shame exists only because of this priority, because it saves us from the negative consequences of disapproval. So essentially, shame exists to keep us in check. If humans were solitary creatures, shame would be completely unnecessary. There would still be emotions though, so we would have fear, pain, maybe even frustration, but there would be no internalized sense of wrongness. Shame exists only because being excluded, rejected, or devalued threatens our survival by eroding our sense of belonging. So shame is not really about emotions or morality like many people think. It's actually about relational cohesion, because it makes us question if we are safe with others when we are a certain way. That's why shame is activated by visibility, exposure, differences, truth-telling, needs, desires, failure, successes. You see, because all of those things increase the risk of being seen, which threatens our sense of belonging. I mentioned it earlier, but I am suspicious of calling shame an emotion. Fear is an emotion. Anger is an emotion. Sadness is an emotion. An emotion moves through you, but shame is different. Shame isn't something you feel like an emotion. It's something that happens to how we identify with ourselves. Shame literally reorganizes who you think you are. That's why it's often described as a heaviness, a collapse, a sense of disgust or wrongness directed inward. This is much different than emotions because when our emotions show up, the focus is often outward. So if we feel angry, we think something might feel unfair. When sadness shows up, we think something hurts us. When fear shows up, we think something is a threat to me. And even joy indicates that something feels good to us, because emotions point to experiences. But when shame shows up, the thought is much different. It's more like something is wrong with me. That's not just an emotional reaction. That's a threat to your identity. And that is exactly why shame is so destabilizing and so difficult to overcome, because it doesn't challenge what happened. It challenges who you believe you are. Now that you understand how shame is different than an emotion, let's talk about what shame actually does. At its core, shame is a built-in mechanism for self-monitoring, not in a moral judgment sense, but a monitoring system designed around relational alignment. The underlying question that shame asks is, if I am seen like this, will I still belong? That's it. When we strip away culture, language, psychology, even trauma theory, shame is simply the nervous system scanning for relational threat. Shame doesn't come from the physical threats. It comes from an attachment threat. And I'll say it again for emphasis. Humans didn't evolve to exist in solitude. We are a relational species. So what that means is that the brain treats loss of belonging as a threat to life itself. This is why shame makes us want to disappear, to hide, to shrink who we are, to collapse, to rewind a situation or event. You see, those aren't emotions. They are all shutdown responses. It's our system saying, abort, reduce visibility, become less. This is not the same thing as an emotion moving through us. It is a protective withdrawal. And here's the thing. Protective withdrawal might reduce immediate exposure, but it also removes the very thing that could disconfirm shame. Because shame is relational, and when withdrawal happens, it happens in isolation. So when we pull back, we go quiet, we avoid a conversation or vulnerability, shame doesn't soften, it actually amplifies. In solitude, there is no corrective experience. No one contradicts the story in our head. No one says, I see you, and you're still going to be okay. So the mind fills this silence with a sense of certainty that you shouldn't have shown that part of you, shouldn't have let someone in, shouldn't have let somebody see the real you, and that you should keep all of your feelings, needs, desires in. Withdrawal might protect us from exposure, but it also protects the shame from ever being challenged. And that's why shame grows strongest in secrecy, in silence, and in isolation. It cannot be dissolved alone. Some people believe that shame points to a misalignment and tells us when we've violated some of our own values. And look, I used to think the same thing. But that's actually conscience. And for right now, this is what I need you to understand. Shame is relationally conditioned. So when we are experiencing shame, we are actually asking, will I lose belonging if a part of me is seen? Conscience, on the other hand, is internally integrated. So it asks, does this align with what I know to be true? The reference point with conscience is our values, not attachment like with shame. Shame tells you that who you are being threatens the rules of attachment that you learned long ago as a child. Those rules from childhood may not even have anything to do with truth or integrity or goodness, and they've likely carried over into your adult life without ever being questioned. It's kind of like a growing up in a family where there were certain rules that everybody knew. They were never really written down, but they were always somehow enforced. So it was like you don't talk about your feelings or you don't embarrass the family. No one actually voted on these rules, yet they persist because no one has stopped to examine or question them, because you already knew the consequences of breaking them. So instead, you internalize them. And now, as an adult, you're still living under those same rules, even though no one is actively enforcing them anymore. Shame is the internal police officer, if you will, of so many of those old family rules. Conscience, on the other hand, is when you step into adulthood and decide what rules you actually believe in. And I hope you can see the difference there. Here are some examples of how shame shows up in our heads, because I think you will be able to see how the underlying internal voice that comes from shame threatens attachment to others. So it says something like, don't be too much, don't need anything, don't make other people uncomfortable, and don't outshine anyone. Don't feel too much, don't be too weak, don't be angry, and don't be yourself. You see, shame isn't pointing to a moral misalignment like conscience would. It's actually pointing to relational conditioning. So what I often see is that people have deep, deep shame around having needs, setting boundaries, feeling too much joy, being seen, speaking honestly, resting too much, succeeding too much, failing too much, existing too loudly, being too quiet. You see, none of these things are inherently wrong, but they often threaten the rules of belonging that we learned so many years ago in childhood. Now, shame is also not the same thing as guilt. Guilt says, I did something that conflicts with my values. So in a way, guilt actually motivates repair. Shame, on the other hand, says, I am the conflict. Therefore, it motivates more fragmentation. If something makes you want to disappear or to hide aspects of yourself, that is not guilt. That is shame. Now, this might sound contradictory, but there are times when shame is actually useful. Shame evolved to help us track relational rupture. So can this be helpful? Yeah. In fact, feeling shame makes you human. And it shows that you aren't a complete sociopath. We all experience shame. It is a universal experience. The distinction here is that it can only be helpful when we view it as a sign of potential disconnection, not a verdict of who we are. The problem is that most people were never taught to question their shame. So shame often becomes our internal authority rather than simply a data point that we should explore. Here's another thing about shame. Shame isn't healed by self-love, affirmations, understanding your childhood more, reframing your thoughts positively, or just simply letting it go. In fact, all of those tactics are going to further reinforce more fragmentation. In reality, shame begins to dissolve when our nervous system learns that being seen with all of our perceived and real imperfections no longer equals abandonment. That's it. There is no magic. What this means is that shame heals relationally, not in solitude. And this is really important to understand because our natural response to shame is to withdraw and hide. Healing our shame means that we must allow ourselves to be fully seen without abandoning aspects of ourselves. It means that we must be willing to be honest, imperfect, and experience those things without punishment or exile, it means that we must allow ourselves to be completely human without losing connection to others. Because until then, shame is going to keep doing its job, keeping you small and thinking you aren't good enough. And when shame is the authority in our lives, that comes with its own set of consequences well beyond low self-esteem. It reshapes how we relate, how we love, how we lead, how we take risks, how we tolerate visibility, and ultimately how fully we allow ourselves to exist in this world. Those who carry the most shame are often raised by caregivers who struggle to distinguish between being bad and doing something bad. So as a child, a mistake might have sounded like, "What is wrong with you? Why are you like this? You always mess things up. I can't believe you do that. You're so selfish." So instead of hearing that a behavior needs to change, a child actually hears, "You need to change." And over time, these small mistakes start to feel like evidence that something is wrong with them. And that is exactly how shame takes root. When mistakes, emotions, or needs are met with criticism, withdrawal, or moral judgment, a child doesn't learn accountability. They learn self-condemnation. Shame is not only a major contributor to low self-worth, it also does not inspire any positive change. You see, unlike conscience, which motivates repair, shame actually fragments the self further. It doesn't motivate you to do better. It actually encourages you to be less. And as a consequence, living with shame requires constant self-protection. And life becomes less about integrity and more about management. Anytime that our identity feels at risk, there are very predictable coping patterns that emerge because of this hyper-defensive state. 3 of the most common are, number 1, blaming others. Blame has a way of redirecting attention outward, so the person never has to face the painful sense of defectiveness they feel about themselves. There's an underlying unconscious belief that if someone else is at fault, their identity can be spared. And number 2, contempt for others. Contempt creates a psychological distance between where you are and where I am. So when we devalue other people, we avoid ever turning that same harsh judgment inward. So it's actually a self-defense against our own loathing. And then number 3 is excessive self-focus, or what modern psychology would call narcissistic traits. When our identity feels fragile, control becomes a matter of survival. So we are preoccupied with image, constant validation, acceptance, and significance. And it is an attempt just to gain a sense of self that has never felt secure. I want you to understand that these strategies aren't character flaws, as modern psychology will tell you. They're simply adaptations to our environment. And this is what shame looks like when it has nowhere else to go. So this is really important to understand, because if the core human drive is to connect, so to be felt, seen, understood, and to belong, then we can conclude that those who experience the most shame are those who have never yet received that experience. Underneath, shame is actually evidence of a relational deprivation. And I'm not saying that that excuses harmful behavior, but it does widen the lens and allow us to respond to people not just with correction, but with some compassion. Brené Brown has done some extensive research on shame, and it consistently shows that it thrives in secrecy, silence, and judgment. Therefore, the antidote is empathy. It's not reassurance. It's not being overly positive or trying to fix something that's wrong with you. It's simply presence and empathy. Shame begins with an unquestioned belief that if a part of me is seen, I'm going to be rejected. Hiding or cutting off aspects of ourselves to maintain connection only perpetuates loneliness. So we must find relationships that offer us this safety to share our stories and connect with others at a deep level. It is literally imperative to our healing. Working with shame begins with awareness. It is not elimination. Shame is never eliminated by force. It softens in connection with others. And when it is seen as information rather than a judgment of who we are, the work is not, how do I get rid of shame? The work is in asking, what set of standards have I been blindly obeying, and who gave them to me in the first place? And then even more importantly, do I even still believe that those are true? Because when shame is brought into awareness, especially in safe and attuned relationships, it starts to begin to lose its authority. So what once felt like truth is now viewed as conditioning. And then what once felt like a sense of our identity is actually just an adaptation. And what once felt like this is who I am is revealed that no, this is just what kept me safe. And the moment those distinctions become clear, you stop confusing survival with integrity and compliance with goodness and silence with maturity. And that is a huge turning point, not because shame vanishes all of a sudden, but because it is no longer the unquestioned voice at the center of your identity. And when shame is no longer in control, you are free to choose who you want to be, not who you had to be in order to survive.